It may surprise some of our viewers to learn that perhaps my favourite genre in all of fiction is science fiction. I know we have spoken a lot about like crime and fantasy and just fiction in general on this channel, and every once in a while I mention whatever science fiction I happen to be reading. But I would like to make more of an effort in talking about science fiction because there's also a lot of books that I want to get to in the genre. We also want to showcase pretty much the broad spectrum of our taste. So we are going to start doing a series of top 10 videos. The internet loves those, and honestly, so do we. So this is going to be a fun way to kind of go through all of the genres that we read, all of the types of books that we read, do a current like count of what are our favorites in each one.
Yeah.
And then see how that evolves over the next few years. The only caveat that I have for my list is I am not going to be including works of post-apocalyptic fiction or dystopia because I like too many books and I want an excuse to include more on this list. So that'll just afford me the opportunity to make a top 10 post-apocalyptic dystopia video. However, that is not going to be a rule for you.
No, I do not read that much science fiction. My favorite subgenres are dystopia, post-apocalyptic, and a bit of space opera thrown in. Bonus points if you can do all three at the same time. So taking those out would not leave me with much of a list. So for me, all subgenres of sci-fi are in there. It's also not a genre that I gravitate to that much outside of those specific subgenres I just called out. So our lists are probably a good bit different. Do you want to kick us off with your honourable mentions?
As I said, I won't be including works of post-apocalyptic fiction, except for one exception, you'll see. But it's my list. I make my own rules, very inconsistently, but there are certain parameters. However, in my honourable mentions, I just want to give a brief shout out to two books. But that is The Road and Station 11. The Road by Cormac McCarthy and Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. Two works of post-apocalyptic fiction, but are very much human-based. On the literary end, on the fiction end, on the speculative end of literary fiction, I suppose.
Speculative fiction is to sci-fi what magical realism is to fantasy, is what I said.
There you go, yeah. I just want to give those a honourable mention, because when I think of science fiction, I don't necessarily think of those books. But if I were just including a big list of things that might be considered sci-fi, I guess they would be very high on it. But I'm going to keep this to more what I consider my sci-fi. Anyway, my two main honourable mentions here are actually another post-apocalyptic, but there's robots in it, so it's science fiction. So this is an honourable mention. This is Mockingbird by Walter Tevis. Which is all about AI and robotics and far future disintegration of humanity and empathy and all of that kind of stuff. It's a very recent read, so it's not cracking the top 10 yet. It might do in time. My second honourable mention is Old Man's War by John Scalzi, which is just a great time all around. Now, I understand that sci-fi nerds might tell me, what about The Forever War by Joe Haldeman? Unfortunately, I still haven't read that book. I know that John Scalzi probably wouldn't have a career without that book, but I've just never gotten around to reading The Forever War. I find Old Man's War has a refreshing amount of humour and kind of light tone for a book that has quite dark subject matter. And I also really like the getting older theme and putting this old soul in a young body. And there's a lot of touching little scenes about just getting old. He writes those characters that are in young bodies really well as older people. So yeah, it's a good book.
I have three honourable mentions. I'll try to make it quick. The first one is The Martian by Andy Weir. Not quite strong enough or a favourite to get into my top 10 list, but I wanted to give it a shout out because it was one of the early science fiction books that I read that made me realize that I can be really into hard science. I loved all the biology aspects of this book, and then it lost me a bit on like the engineering side of things, which was more what I think of when I think sci-fi. But this book kind of showed me that, hey, sci-fi A does not have to be dry, and B, you can be really into the science. And it kind of reminded me that I am into science. So I just wanted to give it a shout out for that. My second honourable mention is Death of the Author by Nnedi Okorafor, which is a book that I read earlier this year. And the reason that it's not really in consideration for the top 10 is that I thought of it later. I made my long list, and then later it came to mind. I was like, oh, I forgot about this one. And I think the stuff that I really loved about this book was not necessarily the stuff that was sci-fi, and that's why it didn't occur to me when I was thinking specifically about science fiction books, even though this is very much a science fiction book. But for that reason, it ended up in the honourable mentions. And my third honourable mention is Revenge of the Sith by Matthew Stover, which is the novelization of the Star Wars movie. If you've watched this channel before, you might have heard me talk about how much I loved that book.
I thought that was going to make the top 10.
It might have, but I was really struggling to put things in order. And I figured, you know what, because this is not... it's not an original story by Matthew Stover, which is fine. That doesn't disqualify it. But I can't really separate how much of my love for this book comes from the book versus from how much I already love the movie and Star Wars. Mm-hmm. So while I fucking love that book and I think it makes the movie better, I can't separate them from each other. It's like both overlap and make one story.
Number 10 on my list is one of the big dog classics. Arthur C. Clarke with Childhood's End. One of the OG First Contact novels, or one of the classic First Contact novels that slowly but surely turns into a utopian dystopia. This one's got aliens in it though, so this is on the sci-fi list. And the reveal of what they look like is pretty cool. You know, there's a bit of like playing with mythology and maybe ancient human history with it. I don't want to spoil anything. But if you're not into sci-fi, you might think, oh, going back to read something from the 50s by Arthur C. Clarke about aliens coming to Earth, is it going to be really dry? No, not really, actually. The first half of this book is about some worker like in the UN or something like that who is basically a ambassador, and he goes to commune with essentially the emissary of this alien race that have sent a spaceship that's just come and hovered over the Earth. And I think there's a few that have hovered over different parts of the world, and then they come and communicate and then they leave. And it's kind of what happens to the human race after something like this. And then eventually it sort of expands into what happens when all suffering ceases to be in humanity, and is suffering necessary for the advancement of humanity? Do we need suffering to continue to be? This is a really interesting book, really good book, a foundational work of sci-fi, and one of the big dogs of the golden age of sci-fi that is on my list, because you're not going to find any Isaac Asimov on my list. I'm not that much of a fan.
Number 10 on my list is the first but not the last on this list that I think barely qualifies as science fiction, and that is The City and the City by China Miéville. I read this year, and it is unlike anything else that I have ever read. It is a book about two cities that are geographically, physically the same city, but two jurisdictions on top of each other. There is undeniably inspiration in a lot of different divided cities throughout history. The one that I thought of the most, being German, was Berlin. And this idea of there could just be in the real world a wall in the middle of a street, and it's the same fucking street, but it actually counts as two different countries and two different sets of laws, and you could be neighbours with somebody one day and the next day they're in a different country than you. And here China Miéville is taking that and making it a bit fantastical, but not necessarily in a literal way fantastical, in that people are walking down the exact same street, but some houses are just in one country or in the other, under one jurisdiction or the other, in one city or the other, and people are just constantly teaching themselves to unsee whatever city they're not in, because if they see it accidentally, that is a breach which is against the law. And here we have a crime being committed that might or might not involve a breach. So it's a crime novel within sort of a literary fiction experiment with maybe sci-fi elements. You can kind of decide up to a point, I think, how much of it you want to think is science fiction versus actually possible. And I loved that about it. It did leave me a little bit cold emotionally. I wouldn't say that this is a book where you're on the edge of your seat rooting for a character that's going to make you cry. But it is unlike anything else I've ever read. It was so interesting and fascinating and odd, and such a cool thing to take inspiration from as well, that I absolutely loved it.
Number 9 on my list is The Chrysalids by John Wyndham, which is from 1955, and in my opinion, quite possibly the biggest inspiration on Stan Lee for the X-Men, because this is kind of, it's post-apocalyptic, but this is on the list because this is about mutants and telepathy, essentially a post-nuclear mutation in the human race. And the focus is kind of on that and how humanity will find any reason whatsoever to be racist. We follow a very secluded, highly religious community in the Canadian wilderness, where the main boy here is kind of a group of children who have been born with a mutation, but they need to hide it from the people in the community because these religious freaks are Puritans and whatever. John Wyndham was known for writing, famously known for writing kind of cozy disasters, I think is what they kind of call them, where he wrote these books about these catastrophic events, but his writing style is very pleasant to read, and it's a lot of dark things might happen, but maybe they happen in like quiet little villages. So it's got that kind of inviting, sort of polite Britishness about it. Except this one's set in Canada, so it's not quite something like the Midwick Cuckoos, which is very like British science fiction of small, quaint village in the countryside gets struck with an alien event.
Sure.
Yeah. This one is really, really good. A lot of heavy inspiration here on the X-Men, I find, as a comics fan. So this was a very cool one to read, and also very pleasant experience prose-wise. So there you go, John Wyndham, The Chrysalids.
Number 9 on my list is 1984 by George Orwell. It's only at number 9, partially because I read it a long time ago. I read it when I was 18, and I loved it. It kind of blew my mind. It did leave me, because people love to tell you, or at least they love to tell me when I was a teenager, oh, this book that he wrote about what he thought the 80s might be like, and it was science fiction, and now all of that stuff is happening, like we're already there. And then I read it and I was like, well, I mean, no, not really. I actually think now that it's been over a decade since I read it, I think we're closer to it. Particularly what I think the most about with this book is the idea of truth, and of who decides what truth is, and what in our world has been referred to as alternative facts, and this kind of thing of like, one day you wake up and the truth is this, and the next day you wake up and the truth is something completely different, and you just accept that, oh, I guess this is the truth now, and we forget that the truth was ever something else. That is probably, to me, the most interesting part of this book. It has been a long time since I read it, and I'm not sure how I would feel about it now, so that is why I didn't put it any higher, based purely on memory. I felt like I was reading something with weight and importance when I read it at 18 years old, and I don't think that has changed. But for example, I would like to read We by, what's his name?
Yevgeny Zamyatin.
Yevgeny Zamyatin, because you read that recently and that was the inspiration for 1984, and George Orwell pretty much admitted to that. So I would like to read that before I make more like sweeping statements on like how good I think 1984 is or where it should go on my list. Anyway, so that's why I was a little bit more like hesitant on where to put it, but I definitely needed to be on my list just based on the impact that it had on me when I first read it.
Also, We is a little more science fiction-y in the classic sense with robots and spaceships and all that kind of stuff. So
Interesting.
Number 8 on my list is a very popular one here on BookTube, or at least on this little corner of the internet, I suppose, but they are bestsellers. It's the Red Rising series by Pierce Brown. I think my favorite currently, I have read the first 4 only. I think my favorite currently is Morning Star. If you ask me objectively what I think the best book so far is, it's probably the 4th one, but this is my favorite one because this it's got me emotional and like adrenaline pumping, fist pumping. This was a kind of an epic book, and it's where the series really went full tilt. Space opera, which is a subgenre of science fiction that I'm very fond of. And we have these beautiful editions, special editions that you bought for us, and we have them signed. Pierce Brown writes rule of cool, fantasy-esque sci-fi, where you've got your factions, the warring clans, the sort of tiered class systems and all this kind of stuff, but with a real love of science fiction peppered into the story as well. There's a lot of references to other classic works of sci-fi. If you're a sci-fi fan, it's kind of cool to spot them. If you're a pretentious sci-fi fan, you might point them out and roll your eyes and then say, yeah, but he's very derivative. Who gives a shit? It's really fun. And honestly, if you get invested in the story, it's just so compelling. He's one of the best modern storytellers, I think, and his writing has real grit and personality to it. He has a writing style that is a little reminiscent of some real punchy crime fiction for me, with sort of, when needed, he kind of shortens his sentences for dramatic effect, and it really, really works.
Yes, that is why I like it so much.
There you go.
Yeah, he does what Don Winslow does.
Yes, he does. When he's building up to like an epic reveal or somebody coming out of a doorway holding a big fucking gun, his sentences get shorter, and and he knows how to do a dramatic word reveal. There's something about the rhythm of his writing and his pacing, and you know, when you turn a page, you land on this thing that happens, and you're like, oh, cool. Every 5 minutes you're saying, that was fucking cool. Anyway, really like the Red Rising books. Yes, I need to read Dark Age. I just haven't gotten around to it yet, but maybe when I read the final 2, which everybody says are the best, this might be higher on the list.
I wanted to say before I started, and I forgot, that this, if you can't tell, you will be able to tell shortly, is not a list of, out of the sci-fi that I've read, which ones I think are the best at being sci-fi. It's out of the sci-fi that I've read, which ones are my favorites. Small difference. I did not take sci-fi elements into consideration for how high things go on the list. Anyway, my number 8 is The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins. And we are picking individual books rather than series, but this one is really a stand-in for the trilogy. There's a lot of nostalgia attached to The Hunger Games. I read them as a teenager, but it's also just snuck up on me as a comfort read. I didn't realize it was, and when I first read it, I actually was resistant to reading it. All my friends were reading it, and I was skeptical. It sounded like a gimmick, but then upon much insistence, I read it, and then the second one came out, and again I thought, this is like a gimmick, like it was a one-off, like stop. I was wrong. These books get more profound as you go on. You really do need all 3, I think, to get the story. She has a lot to say. They've aged well, and I find that I go to them a lot when I want something that is a comfort read that maybe I haven't read 15,000 times. I think they're incredibly readable. They're great for that age group that it's targeting, but they do hold up for adults, in my opinion. You could fall into the trap of thinking that it's like, oh, YA and love triangle and all that stuff. That's not really what these books are at all. That is a mismarketing of the movies, in my opinion, and don't do them a service in terms of how good they are and how serious they are.
Number 7 on my list is one of the craziest fucking books I've ever read in my life. That is The Female Man by Joanna Russ. This book is insane.
Yeah.
This book is unlike any other book I've ever read in my life. This was described by someone as a stream of menstrual rage, which I think is a wonderful description of this book. This is a science fiction novel, obviously. It's about 4 women who are the same person, but they are in 4 different universes. So 4 versions of the same person, same woman, in 4 different universes. And they all 4 are in different types of worlds. One world more advanced, one world only has women in it. Other worlds are women are entirely subjugated, things like this. And then they start to cross worlds and kind of interdimensional hopping and all this kind of stuff. And they walk in each other's shoes, or they experience each other's lives. And this is very much a early feminist science fiction book full of rage at the machine. And it's written in that way, so it's quite a scattered book. It's very stream of consciousness. Half the time you don't know what the fuck is happening, but it is so captivating, like you can't look away. And also the writing line by line is just so good. It's a difficult book to explain, and it's a difficult book to explain why exactly I like it. It's just really unlike anything that I've read. And I think in terms of works of science fiction, Joanna Russ just wrote a belter. This is I have a mate who talks about books that he classifies as face melters. This is 1,000 degrees on the face melter scale. So yeah, give Joanna Russ, The Female Man, a go, especially if you're into like classic, more obscure science fiction. This is a really, really interesting book. And yeah, number 7.
A book that I did love is my number 7, and that is Planetfall by Emma Newman. Another book that I read this year. There's a little bit of recency bias maybe going on my list, but I would say it's just because I am still in the process of getting into science fiction. So Planetfall is a very personal one. A lot of the window dressing of the sci-fi is not really stuff that sounds appealing to me. There's like 3D printing involved and like exploring a new world, and like me reading the back of the book does not entice me to pick it up at all. Like it sounds dry and boring to me. That's not what this book is. It's the opposite of dry and boring. Extremely engaging, extremely quick to read, and it's not about the sci-fi at all. At the end of the day, what this is a book about mental health, and particularly about anxiety. You could probably read it as OCD as well, but somebody with severe anxiety and how they are dealing with it, or more accurately, doing everything in their power to not deal with it. The sci-fi is a bonus if you're into it, and is not going to bother you if you're not into it. There's a cool mystery, an interesting mystery, and you're just in somebody's head that is lying to everyone and lying to themselves and lying to us, and you're slowly seeing this unraveling. And in some ways it felt deeply personal. I'm not going to go into details because I don't want to spoil anything. I think this is a book that is great if you go in knowing absolutely nothing about what it's doing or why or the plot or anything like that. But there were some things where Emma Newman really tapped into some very deep fears and anxieties that hit very close to home. And for that reason alone, it deserves a spot on this list.
Number 6 on my list, we're getting into all the big dogs now, is The Expanse. And I'm going to pick out my current favourite one. I'm 7 books in. I've been reading this series for years now. I just don't necessarily read it back to back like everybody seems to do on YouTube. Uh, so this is Caliban's War, Book 2. It's my favorite because Avasarala is in it, and so is Bobby Draper. But Avasarala, I think, is one of my favorite fictional characters. And if you notice how loose I am with my language, that's an indication of why Avasarala is my favorite character. If the internet weren't so up in arms about the C word, I'd be saying it a lot more often. And Avasarala does. So it's nice that someone in such a position of power so freely uses the word. Because where I come from, it's just a word. The Expanse is number 6 on my list because I'm just so fond of it. I've been reading it for a very long time. I still haven't even finished the series, only 2 books to go. But it is a perfect blend in my mind of space opera with hard sci-fi splashes in there. Gravity is a character in this. The difficulties that gravity places on humans traveling through space, on expanding out to the solar system, is so weighted. You feel the difficulty of it. You feel the danger of space travel, of expanding out into the solar system. And this is also set what feels like something that is within arm's reach, something that is within reach. Maybe 200 years, 300 years in the future. The Expanse also does cool things with language evolving and slang evolving, and the belter community out on the belt, their miners, their bodies sort of evolve in different ways because they've been living there for generations. The slang has changed. It's a mix of German, Spanish, and Creole, or Jamaican patois. There's this sort of hodgepodge language that is really, really cool. And also the sort of political nature of humanity. If you have a space or a base on Earth, on Mars, on the moon, out in the belt, how does that change then the political landscape of humanity? And how does it change unity on Earth versus Mars versus the belt? How does that affect trade? And then at the center of it, you have a constant crew on the Rossi, on the Rocinante, the spaceship, that are just your anchor for the whole series. They mature throughout the books. They grow together as a family. Caliban's War is kind of my stand-in for the whole series here, just because this one was the most riveting to me. It's the one where I got most interested in the politics of the world. I mean, it's one of the biggest selling series in science fiction now. A lot of people know it. It is worthy of its kind of recognition. It's probably one that maybe sci-fi purists think is a bit more generic, but I think this is an excellent work of sci-fi, and I'm very, very fond of it.
My number 6 is a novella, and partially it's here because I was so impressed that so much is in just one novella, and that is Ogres by Adrian Tchaikovsky. Now, this is another one that I don't want to say too much about because I think it's better if you don't know anything about it going into it. So I'll just say it's written in second person, and second person can be very intense to read and can be quite exhausting at times. And I think there has to be a good reason. I feel similarly about second person than I do about lack of quotation marks or lack of paragraph breaks and stuff like that. If you're gonna mess with convention in that way, you should have a reason for it. Otherwise, it just comes across pretentious. And Adrian Tchaikovsky has an excellent reason in Ogres that I think he pulls off very, very well. And I honestly think it's a perfect little work of literature. It's a bit of a, I don't want to say full circle, that's not really what it is, but it's perfectly planned out. I think he knows exactly what he wants to say. That's what he says. It's also an engaging and fun story at the same time with a ton of world building in it. And I just really loved it at the same time that I appreciated what he was doing on a craft level. This was my first Tchaikovsky and still my only Tchaikovsky.
Oh?
Yeah, I believe so. I don't know what's taking me this long because it was excellent.
Number 5 on my list is my nostalgia pick. It's been an extremely long time since I read this book, but this was quite possibly one of the first, if not the first, science fiction books I read as a kid, and I read it a couple of times. That's Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card, and this is the original copy I had as a young fella. This was gifted to me by my uncle, who got me into science fiction as a chiseler. And this book has one hell of a twist, but it is also a little bit like Harry Potter in space, with kind of kids in a school, but it's kind of a battle school. I feel like I should probably reread the series now as an adult and see how it's kind of evolved in my mind since then. And it's probably why it's maybe slid down the list of my favorite sci-fi. Like, it's still in the top 5, but for the longest time this was probably one of my favorite books. But it's been so long now, it's been well over 15 years since I read it the last time. I think I was probably 12 or 13 the last time I read this book. So yeah, that's Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card. I read the first 3 only, actually. So I read up to Xenocide and loved them all, but I just always remember the twist at the end of this book, and it recontextualizes everything you read leading up to it, and all this kind of moral questions about colonization and violence and class systems and this kind of thing. So yeah, Ender's Game, Orson Scott Card, number 5 on the list.
It's funny that you put that at number 5, because my number 5 is Speaker for the Dead by Orson Scott Card. Kind of similar to you, it was probably one of the very early science fiction that I read. I read them in Spanish, so this is not my copy, it's your copy. And I loved Ender's Game because it blew my mind for the same reason you just said. But I also remember finding it very difficult to read at times. It took me a lot of work to get into, whereas Speaker for the Dead kind of had me from the beginning, maybe because it was my second sci-fi and, you know, I was a little bit more, I knew what to expect. But Speaker for the Dead blew my mind just with how thoroughly he was able to invent a completely different species and culture. And it also broke my heart. It broke my heart and blew my mind is how I would describe this book. And it's probably the science fiction book that has made my mind explode. Like, similar with Ender's Game, that like you described this of like mind expanding sci-fi, which is not something like books that are described that way are not usually the ones I gravitate to. But these really did that to me. I would also like to read them as an adult and see, because I think I would not appreciate them more, because I appreciate them a lot as it is, but I would understand and pick up on a lot more, particularly with Ender's Game, like reading it now and probably not having as much difficulty getting into it. But yeah, these are incredible books, and I will never understand how Orson Scott Card wrote these and was then a bigoted person. That makes no sense to me. But people will jump through hoops to justify things.
It's quite a common trait nowadays.
Unfortunately, yes, it is.
Number 4 on my list, why is it at number 4, I hear everybody ask, is Frank Herbert's Dune. However it is you say June. This is the precursor to Star Wars. This is science fantasy. This is a seminal work of science fiction where people have debated whether it's sci-fi or fantasy. It doesn't matter. It's just a really great book. And it's also, in my mind, written like a thriller. But one of those thrillers where it feels so weighted with importance. It's got gravitas. When you read it, you feel like you're reading something important. He gets across in his language and his prose that just kind of sucks you in. Like from the very early chapters where, you know, Paul Atreides puts his hand in the box, that scene, it's very, very atmospheric. and it really sucks you in. And honestly, it's Dune. What do you want me to say? It's number 4 on my list. People have talked this book to death, and yeah, it's one of my favorites too. And I also think that the newest movies do it a lot of justice. They're really good. My one complaint is that they left out the banquet scene, because that's my favorite scene in the book. The omniscient narrator that Frank Herbert uses is ridiculously cool to read, and it's one element of the book that I'm like, if you've only seen those movies, please read the book, because you will get something different out of it. But the movies did a good job. I just wish we got a banquet scene.
My number 4 was an interesting one to place. I really struggled to place it. It is a trilogy once again, and I picked one out of the trilogy, and I thought it was going to be one, and then I was looking at the books, and it was going to be like pretty far down in the top 10, and I figured, oh, I'm surprised that it's this far down. And then I changed it to the first one, and I realized, oh, this entire time I've been thinking that the second or third one are my favorites, but I think with time away, the special one is actually the first one, and it's ended up on my number 4, and that is The Calculating Stars by Mary Robinette Kowal. Now, I still think that the second and third books are the ones that elevate this series, and I originally gave the first one 4 stars, and then the second and third one 5. I think The Relentless Moon and The Faded Sky are amazing. Better books. But The Calculating Stars is the book that made me realize that I could love science fiction. It is the book that brought me back this childlike sense of wonder about space. And it brought me back to being 7 years old and having these little books about planets and being obsessed with Jupiter for some reason, and just being fascinated by what is beyond our world and in the stars. And at some point as I was growing up, I forgot that sense of wonder, and I moved on, and I didn't think that science fiction interested me all that much. And this book brought all of that back, and I love it for that reason. It also brought back a love for maths and like calculus that I had as a teenager, and once again, because I decided to then study humanities, that kind of got parked and forgotten. And it just stimulated my brain with a love for science that was slumbering in the background, and it woke up, and I will forever appreciate this book for it. And the reason I think it was able to accomplish it so well is that it isn't science fiction from the beginning. It starts in the 60s, and then we have some alternate history, which I won't give you any spoilers, but it causes the space race to accelerate and continue far beyond reaching the moon, because of things like climate change accelerating and stuff like that. And because it just takes you on this like progressive slow journey into science fiction, it was much easier to just let myself follow it and fall in love with it than if I'm just thrust into a spaceship and I'm like, I don't know what I'm picturing, I don't know what all these words mean and the techie talk and all that kind of stuff. So it was the perfect book for me to read to get into sci-fi. It's been 3.5 years and I still love it, and it's my number 4.
Number 3 on my list is a book that was on my to read list for well over a decade more, and I finally read it last year and it lived up to my expectations, and it's nice when a book does that. And that is Hyperion by Dan Simmons. And this is a collection of basically 7 different novellas within one book, and there is one through line that kind of pulls you towards the end of the book, and it basically hits every genre which is something that I like as well, being a reader of just books in general. This book hits all the beats of every book you can think of from horror to sci-fi to fantasy to military sci-fi to literary fiction to crime noir. It's got a bit of everything. So Hyperion is also a book that Sci-Fi YouTube has also talked to death, so I don't have to say too much about it. It is a classic for a reason. It deserves its acclaim for a reason. It's a brilliant book. It's one of the best sci-fi books I've ever read, and it's at number 3.
My number 3 is a book that's pretty low on the sci-fi, but it does have time travel in it, so it qualifies, and that is Kindred by Octavia Butler. This is an incredible book. It is more focused on the historical fiction side of things, but like I said, there's time travel, so it qualifies as sci-fi. As I'm saying this, I'm also realizing that I at no point considered Outlander as a contender for this list, even though that also has time travel. But that in my head is historical fiction for some reason. So make that make sense. I don't know. I don't care. Kindred is a book about a woman from the 1970s who travels back in time to the early 1800s in the southern US. And that woman is black. So she does not have a very good time when she's traveling back, and she experiences slavery, and she's on a plantation, and there are familial connections to why she's traveling back in time. I won't say more. This book is so harrowing and dark and depressing, and yet it is written in such a compelling way that I could not stop reading. I don't know how she managed to do that. I was reading it fast like I was reading a rom-com, and it's the opposite tonally from that. I think it's an important book. I think it's a book that everybody would benefit from reading. And it's not just one more book about slavery that's going to use that as a way to pretend to be deep, if you know what I mean. This is actually deep. There's a specific angle that she's going for as well. It is an exercise in like nature over versus nurture, and how does it work? What can we learn to accept as normal if we're exposed to it for long enough? What does trauma do to our ability to stand up for ourselves or adapt to survive, and all those questions? And it's a great book that I think about often, even though it's been a couple of years since I've read it.
My number 2 is also a sort of stand-in for a series of books, a series of 4 books, but I think this third book is my favorite. You already mentioned book 1, which could be on par with this one. This is Before Mars by Emma Newman, book 3 of the Planetfall series. Planetfall being the first book, which you mentioned earlier. Sometimes I think Planetfall is the best one. Sometimes I think the second one is the best one. Sometimes I think this one is the best one. I think the only thing that I'm certain of is that the fourth one, the last one, is the weaker of the 4. This one is like a pressure bubble ready to burst. It's set in one confined location with a group of scientists on a base on Mars, where the AI that is running the sort of base, the operating system is lying to them, and the woman at the center of this is going through issues. So when she becomes suspicious of it, nobody believes her. And I love this as a trope in stories, in movies, in books, whatever. The sort of main protagonist not knowing whether they're really crazy or not, and everybody around them not believing them, and them kind of gaslighting them into believing, oh wait, I am maybe crazy, but I don't feel crazy. This kind of swirling tension is kind of at the center of Before Mars, but it builds on what the other 2 books that come before set up, which is a very interesting sci-fi premise that I can't tell you because it's a spoiler. You'll need to read Planetfall and After Atlas before reading this one. Even though the series is kind of a series of standalones, I would suggest reading those 2 books before reading this one. I made an entire video talking about this series, about how it kind of deals with mental health and like future advanced capitalism and all of this kind of stuff. So go watch that. But know that this is my second favorite sci-fi book.
I debated a bit on whether I should put this as my number 2, because it's a book that I've never talked about on the channel. And I've never talked about it on the channel because I read it 2 weeks ago. And I kept asking myself, is this recency bias? Is this recency bias? Will you feel this way in 2 months? But somebody told me to just go with my gut instinct and not overthink it.
Yep.
And my gut instinct was really confused about where to put all of these books, but it was pretty certain that this was at number 2. So fuck it. At number 2, my second favourite science fiction novel is Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. Again, low on the sci-fi. This is a post-apocalyptic book, but it has an interesting angle. It is a post-apocalyptic book that is focused on arts, theatre, music, culture. How do those things live on after the apocalypse, after civilization collapses? It's set about 20 years after the end of civilization through a virus. And this came out before COVID, which is also interesting. She must have shat herself when COVID happened.
Yeah.
So the first couple of years we're told were very rocky, and now we're starting to settle in again. And it came at the perfect time for me to read. It's an appreciation of the little things. It is an appreciation of art when it's suddenly not available at your fingertips constantly, whenever you want. What if you can't just walk down to the cinema? What if you can't just Google the picture of a painting and look at it or print it? What if you can't order art online? What if you can't go to a theater? What if you can't press play and listen to whatever song you want? What if those things are suddenly only accessible to you if either you can do them, or if somebody is just passing by that happens to do that and you get to watch for an hour? And this reappreciation for art and performance and bringing joy and stories to other people was beautiful, and it got me multiple times, made me quite emotional. But what I loved especially is that this doesn't come at the expense of other things that we have now. Because this is post-apocalyptic, there's no such thing as electricity, for example, and shops and, all these amenities. So there's also this sense of wonder about everything that we have. It's not a cynical book about, we don't appreciate art anymore because we have all these other things and this is bad. It's more like, isn't art amazing and important and what makes us human? But also, isn't it magical that you could just flick a switch and turn on light? Isn't that mind-blowing that we're able to do that? Isn't it incredible that you can get on a machine that flies? So there's no cynicism to it. It's very wide-eyed and hopeful from the perspective of somebody who has been through an apocalypse and has that perspective looking back on what she only very vaguely remembers as the world how it is now. And it's rare to find a hopeful post-apocalyptic book, and partially I love post-apocalyptic books and dystopias because of the darkness to them, but this one was beautiful. And it was also sad. Like, obviously, I don't want to live in a world without like accessible doctors and like dental and stuff like that. But it was a nice reminder to appreciate the little things that we take for granted. And those little things can be anything from flicking your light switch in the morning so you can see all of the clothes that you have that you can choose from. And also being able to sit down and watch a movie or go into a play. I loved it so much. It was a perfect book and perfect for where I'm at mentally and what I needed as a little bit of a pick-me-up as well. So I could not recommend it enough. Station 11.
My number one sci-fi book of all time is one with time in the title. Children of Time by Adrian Tchaikovsky. Spider book. This is Adrian Tchaikovsky at his absolute bug best. The man loves bugs. This is a book about civilization, about the evolution of a species over millennia. But they're spiders. And this book is mind-altering and expanding, and it is all about empathy. And I love books that the essential central theme is empathy. Stories, movies as well. It's subtle here But there are certain passages in the book that then really bring that theme home towards the end. It's crazy that he got that out of me while the main character is an 8-legged, furry, sentient, really smart spider by the name of Portia. This book is crazy. It's so good. And it is incredibly well written. It is a hard science fiction book that also feels like an artistic work of literature in a sense. Not that other works of hard sci-fi aren't, but there's a sensitivity of language in this book as well that you don't necessarily get in other science fiction, that is very ideas driven, concept driven, kind of an extrapolation of science. This is an extrapolation of science. This is concept driven, but it's also got a sensitivity to the beauty of language and to the beauty of empathy. So this book is probably my favorite sci-fi book of all time. It also is the kind of book where I would read a chapter, go, whoa, and then need to put it down for the rest of the day. So the book took me a while to read, but it just gives you so much to kind of ponder. And it's a really cool thought experiment of a similar evolutionary path that humans had, but give it to a different species. And how do they mirror us, and how does their journey hold up a mirror to us in terms of what we do wrong, in terms of what we do right. It's not just, a lot of these books kind of use elements like that to kick us all while we're down, you know, and say, aren't we just stupid? Yes, we are, but we're also great. We could do with being a little less stupid, being a lot less stupid actually, but we're also pretty resourceful. And I like that. Kind of similar in a way, tonally, to why I like Old Man's War, because it doesn't have such a dreary outlook on people. It has more of a dreary outlook on systems of control and organizations that move further away from humanity. Tchaikovsky has a faith in individuals, and it comes through in this book. It comes through in his other works as well. He has overlapping themes in his books, but they're all wildly different from each other. So he is one of my favorite science fiction writers nowadays. But yeah, this one was just a mind-blowing experience. I think this one has some popularity as well on YouTube, on Sci-Fi YouTube. That's my thoughts. I actually don't think I've ever really talked about this book on the channel. That's my number one.
My number one is my favorite book in a series that would have taken up the first 6 slots of this list if I hadn't limited myself to one book per series. And that is, of course, naturally, obviously, Lightbringer by Pierce Brown, and Red Rising as a series by extension by Pierce Brown. This is one of my favorite books of all time. I have talked extensively about how much I love the series on the channel. It is one of my favorite series and stories in general, regardless of genre. I love the characters. That's the main thing necessary to get me loving something, to be honest. They could be doing whatever. I think Pierce Brown gets a lot of credit that he deserves for his action scenes and his, like you were saying, like the rule of cool kind of writing, and how he approaches those scenes and how he builds momentum and like expectation, and that's absolutely fair. He deserves that credit. I think he doesn't get enough credit for how well he does the quiet moments between characters, the little character building moments, the little relationship building moments that he doesn't forget about either. Like, he puts them there, and we might come back to that 4 books later, and the characters haven't forgotten. And that is why these books, I think, keep getting better for me, because they are building on each other. So you're with characters by the 6th book that you've been with for 15, 20 years of their lives, and you've seen everything that they've gone through and how they've evolved and all that baggage that they have, but you've seen them acquire that baggage, and you have it with them and are carrying it with them. And there have just not been many series or books, or just stories in general, that have so thoroughly swept me away and so thoroughly made me love characters and hate characters and feel as if they were real people that I know, and played with my emotions so much because of it. And on top of that, it's just fucking cool. Oh my god, there are so many epic scenes that immediately come to mind. And I'm not a big action scene person. I mostly they bore me. So, but he does it in a way that just really, really works for me. And I think what you just said about his writing style being similar to like some crime and thriller writing, I think that is exactly it. Like, it's a similar kind of itch that is being scratched.
Good crime writing.
Great crime writing. Yeah, not your average airport thriller. But yeah, Red Rising is my favorite series, probably, and my favorite sci-fi, certainly. And Lightbringer is one of my favorite books of all time. I also had an incredible reading experience reading it, because I got to buddy read it with a bunch of friends on Discord when it was released. So that just feeds into what I think of when I think of this book. There we go. That is the first of our new little series of top 10s, our favorite science fiction novels, quite different from each other, a little bit of author overlap, but not a single book overlap, which is pretty cool.
That is cool.
Yeah, it comes partially just from the fact that you have read a lot more sci-fi than me, and you didn't include the subgenre that makes up half of my list. So that's probably the main reason.
That would have affected my list in a big way as well, which is why I probably want to do a whole separate dystopia post-apocalyptic list.
Yeah, you go do that. I support you.
We wanted these videos to be, because we'll do more. We'll do our top 10 crime, our top 10 regular fiction, we'll do our top 10 fantasy, top 10 post-apocalyptic dystopia, top 10 comics, just to show all of the taste that we have and have them documented there on the channel. We don't actually do a ton of top 10s apart from the year-end stuff, so as it stands at the moment, this is what it is, and we'll see how it evolves over time.
Let us know in the comments which top 10 you're most excited for. That is still to come. And if you're up for it, let us know what your favorite science fiction novels are. 5, 10, 7, however many you want.
14.
Like the video if you liked it, and if you're interested in any more of our top 10s or other ramblings, consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so already. We'll chat to you in the comments, and we'll see you soon. Thank you for watching.
Goodbye.